Please, for access, give me an option to make age transitions more disruptive. Was not on my Civ 7 wishlist in a week that saw Civilization 7 seek a new head of product to overhaul the entire franchise, and a new patch update just dropped. In a twist to the recent patch format, it is the second patch update in as many weeks, and this one was accompanied by a much juicier message, flanked either side by a written statement from Civilization 7's creative director, addressing the quote-unquote excitement and debate across the Civilization community on the topic of ages. Here, it also teases some interesting, if not a little extra, ideas for age transitions, like that one where the severity or harshness of the age transition that I've just alluded to is actually ramped up rather than smoothed out. Against the backdrop of very low player counts for Civilization 7 and a struggling game more broadly, let's explore the interesting news and rather juicy developments buried in here this week for Civilization 7. Starting with some background, the patch update that just dropped today, a matter of hours ago, is actually very simple and fairly minor. Essentially, there were a couple of urgent fixes or changes to issues generally that were rolled out, like mouse clicking not working, and the opening up of the debug menu. Functionally, there are really just two changes, and again, it's about the age transitions, just like it has been now for months. Age transitions are now located here in the easier to access main settings, rather than being buried in the advanced options, which is where they used to be, where they were added to somewhat recently anyway, when they were actually introduced to the game. Firaxis have also made 3 game settings stickier. Meaning Civilization 7 will now remember the setup you used last time. Game speed, game difficulty, and age transition impact settings are now sticky. They'll stay put between games or restarts. I'd note this is called Update 1.2.4 Patch 1, so perhaps there'll be a subsequent patch 1.2.4. So I guess we'll see something, maybe a 0.5, with small changes and or feedback iterations to follow in the near future. Moving on to the substance, or the interesting stuff in my view, the patch was accompanied by that update from Civ 7's creative director, where honestly about half of it was really just spent recapping the regroup versus continuity changes that we've seen in Civilization 7. If you haven't been following along, in a nutshell, the new continuity mode sees things like army unit positioning on the map stay consistent through an age transition. They won't be teleported and distributed across your cities and towns. You don't need to arbitrarily build more commanders to act like caregivers for them. Here, though, in the detail, it talks about the sticky change from today's patch and how it will benefit players who like to keep fighting through the age transition. As if that is always a choice. It also says that the continuity mode, that new default, is a nice way to play to allow players less disruption to their military campaigns. I would argue it's closer to a classic Civ experience, and actually probably just a nice way to play any and every campaign, but maybe that's just me. Nice to have the option there, I suppose. The most fascinating part for me is buried at the end. The Civilization 7 dem seem to be exploring a new option for age transitions, a third way forward. Not caving to community demands for less change. Not military regrouping, teleporting nonsense, but actually leaning in to the harshness of age transitions. They're tentatively, and seems to be early days kind of feeling about it, calling it collapse. And we don't know much more about this collapse setting, this collapse mode, except it's in early testing and may or may not make it into the game in a future update if it ain't fun enough. I have some real thoughts on this, and frankly, I'm quite torn. Go figure, a fence sitter. I think that options and choice are good things, right? Broadly speaking, on balance. An extra setting? Go nuts. It's also refreshing, on the positive side of things, to see Civilization 7 lean into itself a little more, like it did when it added an extra commander for Vietnam. I don't actually want it to be an exact replica of Civilization 6. There's really no point in that, right? On the other hand, though, man, it's an interesting thing to choose to tease here, right? In a statement that emphasizes how much they appreciate community feedback, I think multiple times, they seem to be teasing something that literally nobody has asked for. Who has been out there arguing for harsher age transitions? Please, Firaxis, give me the option to make my age transitions worse, said nobody ever. Of all of the things that they could have changed, experimented with, or teased, I really don't know why this would be the thing. Again, it's not necessarily a bad option to have. Maybe it'll be really fun, change things up. But if improvement and feedback is key, why emphasize or even work on this now, given all of the other issues and challenges, debate, and I'm sure feedback on the game? They end the update by acknowledging the community's ongoing feedback and that the age transition system will see more enhancements over the coming months. Speculatively, if I put my speculative hat on, I think that a quote-unquote collapse mode could be interesting if it's very aggressive and unforgiving. Hear me out here. Perhaps instead of just messing with unit positions, leader relationships, trivial stuff, it could take the Aheda History Untold approach. If you're not familiar with that game, the approach is essentially one of knocking out players who are losing really badly. In essence, the player who got stomped on or just has not done well doesn't see the next age as their empire collapses during this period. Empires collapsing, of course, should not be an unfamiliar topic to any budding historian and therefore 4X strategy history gamer, and Aheda History Untold leans into it in quite an unforgiving way. The danger here, of course, is that there's a fine line between tension-building mechanics and feels bad mechanics. It might, though, fix that thing of players not finishing a Civ game, not playing the ages. Just boot them out if they're not doing well. Look, it's an interesting idea. I guess it could also lean into the crises mechanics a little bit more, or see some sort of other collapse around cities. I personally wouldn't mind if the warehouse buildings collapsed altogether. Ultimately, I don't know what it will be, but what do you reckon it will be? I think we can hive mind some ideas down in the comments below. The final big part of the interesting news that came this week, not today like the rest of the stuff, but actually just a couple of days ago, came in the form of a job advertisement. Again, hear me out here. Firaxis are hiring what I believe to be a new position, a quote-unquote head of product for Civilization. Now, if you've ever applied for a job like this one before, or even just a job, actually, you'll know that these advertisements are ambiguous and topped up, no, in fact, stuffed full of corporate buzzwords. Multifunctional collaboration. That's right. Don't be out there collaborating with just a single function. For that wouldn't really be collaboration at all. There are some tangible and accountable words here, though, for the future head of product of Civilization, and this leadership role, absolutely, seems to involve market trend analysis, user experience, research and insights, as well as business planning and ways to grow the franchise cooperatively across many arms. They're looking for someone with 10 plus years experience in the gaming industry, with expert knowledge of market trends and a bachelor's degree in a quantitative field. Some of the wording in the description gives me big Battle Pass vibes. Quote, experience in evaluating design, UX, and in-game economies to optimize player behavior and engagement, end quote. Despite being an advisor by trade, and absolutely open to, if not wanting to relocate, I am somehow not quite so sure here that they'll be advancing my application to the next round of consideration. Nonetheless, that brings us to the end of some pretty interesting news about Civilization 7's design, its development, some questions around what its future may hold in the short term with a new age transition setting that seems to throw smoothness out the window in favor of something far more abrupt, or at least something likely to see collapse occur in some way. And then in the future, and with a new head of product, a new design principle, collaboration moving forward, perhaps. I don't know. Look, there's a lot of buzzwords in there, a lot of interesting stuff for the future of Civilization 7. I'm keen, of course, to see how it plays out, and I think we'll be in for a fairly long journey. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Stay civilized, and I'll see you next time.